Welcome to Wining and Dining with Jim White. It's the program devoted to introducing you to the people who make the eats and drinks you love, the flavors you simply adore. And we talk to all the best people behind that. And if you're like me, probably every single person alive, you love great bread and great pastries and other fresh baked products. Meaders Ozarow, who is the owner of Empire Baking in Dallas, is with us. Meaders, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk all about the great restaurants you supply and all the great products you make, and just so glad to have you on the show, along with our dear friend Paula Lambert, who is back as our guest gourmet. Hi, Paula.
Hey, Jim. How are you?
I'm well. I know you and Meaders go back a ways, and people often see the two of you together at great events, putting your mozzarella cheese together with her wonderful Empire Baking products.
I love Meaders bread. I just love it. And we've done everything together for 25 years, I guess. Meaders, how long is it?
It's been 25 years. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. And as Paula always says, bread and cheese go great together. And so it became a marriage kind of made in heaven that we would sample together for events that came up and for charity events, and we've had a great time.
That's wonderful. Now, Paula, in your role of guest gourmet, what insights can you give us about the great cheeses that you want to put with her bread and so forth?
Well, I think you need to think about balance. For instance, I was thinking that Kalamata olive bread and either fresh mozzarella or fresh goat cheese are the best together, because you have this wonderful intensely flavored bread and then this mild, delicious cheese. But at the same time, they've got so many, and I think our most favorite is the mascarpone torta with pecan pralines with pecan raisin bread. Have you had that, Jim?
Yes, I have, thanks to you and Meaders.
Well, people come up to us and they die if we don't have it.
Well, I know. Well, we don't want that to happen, so please have it. And folks, you can stop by Empire Baking on Lovers Lane and get it, or go to probably every great restaurant in the area and sample it too. Meaders, tell us the story about how you and Robert put this together, because you've really become a dynasty with Empire Baking.
We were at a point in our careers, both of us, where we had kind of hit a plateau, and my husband felt like that there was not any real great bread in Dallas. And I didn't know much from good bread because I hadn't been all that exposed in West Texas. And so I went to New York and had some really great bread and realized that what he was talking about in terms of a European style bread that had that real crusty exterior and that real kind of sourdough or developed flavor, depending on what bread it was really something that I had never seen around in Dallas. And so we came back and began to figure out how we could start a bakery. We thought at the beginning it was going to be a little mom and pop retail shop where we'd both wear little aprons and stand out front. And we realized pretty quickly that we needed to begin to sell more volume in order to make it work and for it to be a livelihood. And so we began to call on restaurants, and we've had some restaurants that have been our customers for 25 years. And it's been pretty amazing because they took a real chance on us 25 years ago, as well as we had a supplier, it's now called Bake Mart, but we met with them in our house in the living room and said we were going to start this bakery and we needed King Arthur flour. And there was no King Arthur flour in Dallas. And they said they would bring King Arthur in by the pallet. So King Arthur flour started rolling in by the truckloads, and we began making bread and selling it to wonderful restaurants, places like the Adolphus and Parigi and the Hyatt and the Mansion. They've been customers for 25 years. So.
That's amazing. Now, for folks who are not bakers or bread makers or any of those things, like me in particular, explain the significance of King Arthur flour.
It's just an unprocessed, it's unbleached and unbromated. And so it hasn't been modified in any way. If you don't chemically bleach flour, it will naturally turn white over time if you allow it the time to do that. And King Arthur has a patented process which gives us the right amount of protein for making bread. So basically bread was made, grocery store bread was essentially made by machine. And we always say, when things are being done by machine in the Industrial Revolution, you got to make it uniform. So when you put a piece of paper that's the wrong size in your laser printer, you have a paper jam. Same thing happens if you make bread that's the wrong size for your machine. And so a lot of things had been done between the 20s and the 50s to bread to make it work in machines so it would all come out the same. And the way bread was originally done, those things weren't done, and you had a lot more flavor and a lot more interesting bread. So you used flour that hadn't been processed, which makes it a little less predictable. We used natural starters that were things that helped the bread rise, but that weren't a real vibrant, hot form of leavening. So we used, let's say, a tablespoon of yeast to leaven 40 pounds of bread versus 2 pounds of bread. And then we used things like 55-degree water, cold water. We gave it a long time to develop. We let it rise in 70-degree temperatures. All of these were things that people said, well, you can never make bread that way. But it really was the way that it was made originally. And what it yields is a lot more flavor. So aged cheese, aged wine, and bread all benefit from the allowance of time. You give it time and they evolve with a lot of really great flavor. But we're in kind of a culture where time is money. And so people would say, let's do it fast. If you don't take time, then, we can pay people less of a wage and it'll be cheaper, but it's not as good. So
there really were some unintended consequences to that old saying, the best thing since sliced bread.
Yes. Absolutely.
It was already good.
Yes.
Why mess up a good thing?
Yes.
Now, I spent many years in San Francisco, and they're very proud of their sourdough bread. And I heard often that it could never be replicated with the taste and the flavor profile that people enjoyed in San Francisco because it was so dependent on weather and humidity and I guess the baking apparatus or oven or so forth. What do you say to that?
We get the same flavor that they get because we take the same amount of time and care with it. And what really, we do modify things for the weather that's here versus there. We may mix wetter or cooler depending on what the humidity and the barometric pressure is and what's going on. But the real issue is that you had immigrant cultures coming in to San Francisco that were making bread the way they had made them in the old country. And all we did is go back to those processes and take the time and the effort and the energy to make it the way it had been done 100, 200 years ago. So you have differences. I mean, I always say it's the top 5%. You have people that will say that they love San Francisco bread or this bread or a New York bread, and it's really personal preference at that point. But I think there are a number of cities that are making really good bread like we make, and it's really an issue of taking the time and the energy and the effort. And again, I will say that it's so easy to compromise when you want to save money or you want to save labor. And we just stop at that and say, people in this culture right now are willing to pay more for higher quality products. And therefore, we're going to make a natural product that takes a lot more time, but it's better for you. It tastes better. It's got better nutrition to it. It's all the way around a better product.
Yeah, I would say that as good as your bread is just fresh right out of the oven, just all that tender, loving care. I don't care if it's from Cincinnati or Shanghai, but if it tastes that good, I want to
Yeah.
it. Now, your operation is amazing. I came by and saw your bakery, your factory, whatever you call it. And that place is in operation 24 hours a day?
Yeah, we're there 24/7. So we start mixing breads at 10 o'clock in the morning. We start shaping them at 4 or 5 in the afternoon. We start baking at 8 or 10 at night, and we start packing it at 1 or 2 in the morning. And then we have trucks leaving about 4 or 5 in the morning that are making deliveries all around the city. Plus we deliver to our retail stores. And then we start at, the trucks are back about 8 o'clock and we start all over again every day. And we're 24/7, 365 days a year. are always baking.
How many different varieties of products do you make there? Breads?
It's hard to say. I mean, there's 110, 120 different types. We always say we wish we could make one type of bread that everybody would love, or maybe the Jolly Green Giant, one huge loaf of bread that that would save us a lot of effort and a lot of changing up things and a lot of time. But we do a lot of different things. There's a lot of different restaurants in the city that want different kinds of breads, and so we've kind of evolved to a group of things that we know we can do a good volume in and that are well liked. But it is interesting because occasionally we will have restaurants, it's probably been 15 years ago, where I'll get a call from somebody that they want something we don't have, and I'll say, we can't do that. And then I get a second call, and we begin to realize it's a trend. One of the things I tease about is sliders. Somebody called me 15 years ago, and they said, we need sliders. And I said, I don't know what a slider is. And they said, well, you know, those little things that you put small hamburgers on. I said, I still don't know what it is. Are you talking about a roll? And they got a sample of one, and all of a sudden, we went from not doing that to probably doing 2,000 or 3,000 because everybody within a 5-year period wanted to have sliders on their menu, and hotels wanted to do sliders for appetizers. And so we listen, and we find that there are things that the market wants that we can make in a better way than has been done. And there's a real, we change what we're making based on what people want.
That's good for you. That's called customer service.
Well, we're very customer service oriented. I came from a background of selling high-end furniture, and one of the things that I realized is that when people pay a lot of money for something, they need to feel like that they're not wasting their money. And so, we have a saying at Empire that we always answer the phone. It's just not that hard to answer the phone. And even if you don't have the answer, you can tell somebody you'll call them back. But to make sure you're there, the most frustrating thing I think people find is trying to communicate with somebody and not having anybody there or not having anybody respond. So we try very hard to make sure we do that, both retail customers and wholesale customers, answering their questions, doing what we can to help. But it's the value that we can add to a more expensive product without having to do anything that costs something. Customer service is just a mentality. It's really just helping people.
I think based on what you were saying and based on the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, pardon my mixed analogies, your team has been so loyal to you and the product and the effort. In fact, many of them there almost from the very beginning, and I'm thinking specifically about Chris Cutchall and so many people that work to put your fabulous product out on a daily basis. Talk a little bit about that and laud your team if you'd like.
We have our head baker is Chris Cutchall. He's been with us 24 and a half years.
Okay.
He came about 6 months
Got
after.
there as soon as he could, right?
That's what he'll tell you.
Yeah.
He was in Houston working in restaurants, and his mom said to him, bread is a really big trend. If you wanted to be on the cutting edge of what's coming down the pike, you should get into the bread business. And he came up, and we've had a great team with him ever since. We have about 50 employees. We have probably 70% of those employees that have been with us between 15 and 18 to 20 years. So it's definitely a team effort. You can't make a product that takes this long with a lot of turnover, because we depend a lot on people looking and feeling and smelling and touching the bread. I say Chris has the ability to walk through the factory, and he can tell by the color if they've forgotten to add salt. Now, they don't do that much anymore, but every once in a while they would forget to add salt. And if you don't have a little salt, it doesn't taste good. Nobody would buy it if it didn't have a little salt. And it's just this ever so pale yellow tint that I can't even differentiate, but Chris can tell. And he's like, we got to remix that. You've forgotten the salt. And I'm always like, can't believe. He told somebody the other day that he could smell that the bread was kind of at the right spot, that it was going to be really good today. And again, that's a lot of fine tuning, and he's trained a lot of people to do that. So it takes a trained workforce that are all working together to do what we're doing.
Would you please ask Chris if he could tweet that out so we'll know which days those are when the bread's going to be really good?
It's really good pretty much all the time. It's just that there's certain days where it's like, where he's like, hey, man, this is really going to be a good day. So
that's wonderful. Paula, how did you and Meaders get aligned? Because you're like the Bobbsey twins practically at special events all around. There's an event is no fun without Mozzarella Company and Empire Baking Company.
Well, I heard about Empire, and it was going to open up on Oak Lawn, right where La Dooney was, eventually later. And I went by there to pick up some bread because I was going to go do a demo that night out at the Weston at the Galleria. And I got the bread, and Meaders said, we've got something special. We've got something special. You've just got to try this. And I said, what is it? And it was the pecan raisin bread. And I tasted it. I said, this is so good. I'm going back to the factory to get some mascarpone torta. And I'm going to take it out there and I'm going to introduce it to the world today. And anyway, we started doing that. And the bread is better with the cheese. The cheese is better with the bread. And people know what bread and cheese are, and they're happy to come and try our things at all of these events. We just always have a line, and they're always real happy.
Yeah. We always call that Paula's famous recipe because that was her famous combination. She came up with that combination, and I have given her various breads at various times, and it never is as good as that singular combination. But I remember that day very well. We were standing at the front retail counter, and it was dark outside. She was getting ready to go. And it really is, it's been a lovely partnership. It's been great.
Well, as I said, I meant that sincerely. An event around Dallas-Fort Worth without Mozzarella Company and Empire Baking is no event at all. You don't want to be there.
Oh.
They're not there. Now, you told me a fascinating story about your factory. I mean, I'm sure most people know you with the retail store at Inwood and Lovers or from having your bread, but they may not know the background, and it's really an interesting story about how you and Robert came to have that location where you bake all this wonderful magic.
Yeah, we had been in business for about 10 years, and we needed more space. We were in about 3,000 square feet, and we had pushed out of that space 2 or 3 times trying to create more space. And La Madeleine was going through a transition, and they were going to move from doing more things on site in their stores and away from a centralized commissary. And so their factory was available, and they came to us and said, we don't really want to take all these ovens out. It will be really involved to take all the ovens and all the ductwork out. And if you could use it and you could move over, you could assume the lease and take it over. And so for 15 years, we've been in that space, which is about 9,000 square feet. We are busting out of 9,000 square feet now, but it has been a great place to be. It was centrally located, not too far from the Central Market at Lovers in Greenville. So we're real centrally located, easy to get to the wholesale customers. And it was a great way to do expansion without having to take on a lot of debt. So we got very lucky.
Great story. So any leasing agents or retail agents, if you've got about a 12 or 15,000 square foot space, you can make Meaders and Robert a great deal on them. They might be interested going forward. Meaders, I'm sure you get the question these days because it comes out of so many mouths, off of so many lips. Do you have any gluten-free products? What do you...
we don't. So number one, we're very conscious of the purity of ingredients. That's really important to us. As I said to you before, we're not putting any dough conditioners in. We're not putting any additives in. We're not putting anything into the bread other than flour, water, salt, leavening, and then occasionally, eggs or something that might be required in a specific dough. And so there's a lot of flour in the air all through the factory, which would contaminate anything gluten-free if we were to do it. And the technology is different. So the way you deal with a bread is that gluten is a lot like the exterior of a balloon. And carbon dioxide from the starters is emitted because the starters are the leavening is essentially a bacteria. So it's expelling carbon dioxide just like a human being, and it gets captured in this gluten, which is elastic, and it blows up by a balloon, and that's how it is leavened or raised or becomes a big loaf of bread. So gluten-free bread doesn't work that way. You have to use different things. And so because the technologies aren't the same and because we would contaminate it if we made it there, there's not a lot of synergy between the two. So we really don't do gluten-free products. We kind of stay in our lane and do what we do well. But I have to say that as much as there is a trend for gluten-free, we feel like we are so fortunate because we started making bread 25 years ago, making natural breads with no additives or preservatives, a very high, what I would call high quality food. And the market has continually moved towards us. So over the last 25 years, people have only become more interested in eating more organic food, more pure food, more food without additives. And so the market continues to move towards us. So even though the gluten-free market takes some away, people and their interest in having higher quality food only gets to be a bigger market and a more just a higher volume market for us all the time. So we continue to grow. We've grown for 25 years and continue to see growth because people care about what kind of food they're eating and where they're eating their food.
That's a great story. Now, I see also from your website that because everyone wants convenience now and have it brought to their door, you're involved with Uber Eats. What can they order from Uber Eats from Empire?
So at the retail store, we started 24 years ago making sandwiches that were grab-and-go sandwiches out of the breads because we wanted to show people what you could do with this kind of bread. So we make a chicken salad sandwich on walnut scallion bread, and we make a tuna salad sandwich on farm bread. And so all of those sandwiches are now available through Uber Eats. We're trying technologically to stay with where the market's going. And so that makes it a lot more convenient for people. And we also work with caviar, so we have both of them. And we do, every day we get a few orders on those platforms, and it's been great.
Thank you so much for offering that high-tech service. Yeah. And there may be an Amazon drone near you with a nice fresh loaf of sourdough from Empire Bakery coming soon.
We're very low-tech in how we make the bread, but we need to be very high-tech in how we get the product to people. So, it's the combination of the two. We're trying to stay... I think when you were in the bakery, you saw there's a lot of people, a lot of handwork, a lot of things being done by hand by people, which is pretty low tech. And then on the other side, trying to make sure that we are continuing to offer technology in the way people want to consume those products.
Well, I think you might call that high touch in a high tech world.
There you go.
Keep up the good work, and thank you for joining us. And
sure.
We love it. Like the old song said, I like bread and butter. I like toast and jam, if it's from Empire Baking. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, it's time now to get another Vicki Uncorked, and Vicki Briley-White joins us on Wining and Dining with Jim White.
It's just such a sense of accomplishment and being able to elevate the spirit of somebody just by virtue of experiencing a wine. To say that one person is an artist and another is not really what I'm trying to say. I think we have different approaches, and everybody has a different opinion about what they feel is the right way to make wine, or the right way to bring the expression of that,
wine, or
to drink wine,
yes.
all those things. It's very subjective, obviously. But I'm only saying that if we hit that note for one person one time, that just makes it all worthwhile for me.
Now, if someone wants to purchase your wine, what do they need to do?
Well, we have a mailing list where we sell about 2/3 or so of our wine directly to we call them subscribers, because typically they're purchasing from us on an annual basis each vintage. That's the surest way to be able to secure an allotment. We do distribute the wine to primarily restaurants around the country and frankly around the world, but they're typically the top restaurants, and they typically get very, very small amounts of wine, as does everybody, because we only have a 6-acre vineyard. It's pretty small, and from that vineyard we make these two wines. One we call Ampersand, with the and sign here, and the other is called Levy and McClellan, and roughly we make about 3,000 bottles a year of each of those, so it's really not a lot.
You went to school with, it's very interesting, when I did some research, you went to school at UC Davis with some old friends of ours, Michael Martini, Tim Mondavi, Tom Rinaldi,
and a very dear friend.
And I forgot, there was someone else. And I told, and there were lots of them. I told you earlier, I said, I would love to have been in the lab when y'all were creating the perfect wine. So any comments before I ask them?
Yeah.
We're going to have the UC
No, you know,
Davis
it would be a fun experience actually, but as I think I alluded to when we were talking about this earlier, you know, if you have 5 different winemakers in a room or 10 different winemakers in a room, you're going to have 10 different opinions.
Right.
And we all you know, appreciate each other's approaches and consume each other's wines and all that. But when it comes down to it, maybe it's the ego in us, whatever, I don't know what it is, but we all kind of are at a different point. If we're told we had to come up with a compromise and come up with a wine, I'm sure we would, but it wouldn't necessarily mean that those would be our first choice wines. Yeah. No, I don't know if it would be that. But
No white Cabernet for you. What is your perfect food wine pairing?
Let me step back just for a second and talk about kind of the evolution of wine in my career. As I mentioned earlier, the wines in the early part of my career were technically correct. They tended to be higher acidity, lower ripeness, and the tannins in the red wines were maybe not perfect, and so it was difficult to not only pair them but even to consume them with the kind of pleasure that I was interested in trying to develop and present to people. So then there was a period of increasing ripeness, so that we wanted to retain freshness vis-a-vis the acidity and the character, not going over the top as far as concentration and dried fruits or jamminess kind of thing.
Fruit bomb.
Yeah. So there was a period where we elevated to a point, and it was trying to discern where to stop that and still retain that freshness, and that's kind of where I've been. There have been lots of producers over the years that have taken that beyond, and they're now coming back, kind of the pendulum swinging back. But for me, for a wine to be not simply hedonistic and a standalone phenomenon, and to pair with food, no matter what the food, it needs to have the ripeness along with the freshness. We call it tension, if you will. There's a balance between the acidity, the soft tannins, the ripe fruit flavors, but not overripe fruit flavors, and how it all fits together in harmony. And that's the goal, I suppose.
And so, what would you pick? You can't escape the question.
What would I pick?
Yeah, what would you pick for your perfect food and wine pairing?
Oh, I see. For our wines here, well, you know, when in Texas, do as Texans do, I guess.
Wrestle up some cattle.
Something along those lines. I had dinner last night with some lamb that was fabulous. We didn't drink our wine, but that would be another good choice. But yeah, you can't go wrong with a great piece of beef.
Tell me, maybe you've never had this, but have you ever had just a lamentable pairing?
You know, some of the biggest clashes are things like highly vinegary sauces, or even a salad with a heavy red wine or something like that would be kind of clashy. But yeah, there are pairings that exist
Just
that
don't
work. Yeah.
You know, and so do you think that when people say, just drink what you want to drink, and you know, it doesn't matter, Pairings
I
don't
do,
matter.
because if I find something like that not working together, somebody else might. I don't know, but why would I say don't do that if they enjoy it?
I say don't do that a lot to
Do you?
people. Yes. Well, it's, because
I might say I wouldn't recommend that.
there you go. There you go. Well, I'll need to try that new word, recommend. So tell me, what are your blends on these wines?
So we planted the varieties in our vineyard based on what was best suited to the particular site where they were in the property. So we have some Merlot on a piece of ground that's a little higher in clay loam, and it's a little cooler part of the property, and better suited for that type of soil. The rest of the property is all volcanics, and Petit Verdot we planted on a little corner of it that was basically all rocks, hardly any topsoil at all.
Wow.
And Petit Verdot being a very vigorous growing variety, it helped to temper and balance the growth habit of that, and it worked out very well. I really like that a lot. It's just less than a quarter acre of the property. The Cabernet Franc similarly was so in the volcanic soil where we are, there's typically what's called a Akin series or Akin loam. That's a clay loam with rocks in it, on top of an area of volcanic ash called tufa or volcanic tuff. So the area where the Cab Franc is actually where the tufa comes to the surface, and there's really no loam on top of it. So again, Cabernet Franc is a little bit more vigorous, and when it is vigorous, it has a little more vegetative aromatic expression. So this was a way to temper that as well, and so we planted the Cab Franc on this volcanic tufa, and the rest is Cabernet. So most years, both of these wines could be labeled as Cabernet Sauvignon, meaning they're more than 75%
Right,
Cabernet.
okay.
But there have been a few vintages where we didn't meet that requirement, and that's why we call them red wine, so we have that flexibility. We're trying to make the best wine from that site for that vintage, and if that means it's a higher percent of something else, then that's going to be the best wine instead of being restricted to having to call it Cabernet Sauvignon.
Do you see any trends coming in the wine industry?
I mean, right now the trend is rosé, and that's going to be gone, who knows, 18 months, 24 months, 3 years, whatever, I don't know, but it's a very human-driven, cyclical business, and so there always will be trends. I try not to catch the latest fad, but as far as viticulture and production techniques and practices and technology, always want to be interested in what's happening to understand it, and decide if it's a practice that will help us and improve from it, or if it's a fad that's maybe something that's not something we're interested in the long term. So, I've always felt, and this is probably the most important thing I've learned at university, and anybody I think could and should learn from university, is that you never stop learning.
That's right.
So always trying to improve.
This is the way I feel about wine, and so many people that really don't have that experience, they don't understand it. I find that a lot with women in particular.
Well,
and
it can be quite intimidating, unfortunately, just the number of different names of wines and styles of wines and names of varieties, and there's many efforts to try to make it not intimidating,
more approachable.
but it's just so can be overwhelming, I think, and people don't want to think that they're going to look stupid by not knowing something.
Exactly. And by drinking the wrong thing with something. Most women, most women have husbands who like Cabernet.
Yeah.
And
they want something other than Cabernet.
and so they go, you have this
white
Cabernet,
wine,
and they're having something different, and of course they're going to hate the Cabernet because they're with fish or with whatever it is that they're having.
Yeah, with salad.
So
whatever.
that's something we want to. That's kind of one of my missions, is to try to educate people to at least be more aware and experiment.
And be comfortable.
Any parting words for us?
No, I think your words are right. We need to make it comfortable is a word that I would use for people to enjoy wines and enjoy the pairings that they select. not make it so intimidating.
That's right, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Pleasure. Cheers.
Cheers.
And some delicious wine. We had a chance to sample that at Le Cave. Thanks to Bob Levy for his great work in the wine industry. Paula, thank you for your great work in the food industry and the wonderful Mozzarella Company, and for being our guest gourmet.
Well, I love it. I think it's the best thing I've been doing.
Making cheese or being on the show?
Being on the show. I like this.
God bless you. She knows just what to say. And Paula, we're going to devote an entire program to you and Mozzarella Company. So I want to invite folks to stay with us and tune in for that when it's along here on vocalnow.com and our other outlets. And remember, if anybody asks you what you're making for dinner, tell them reservations.